Hey, Motorman here. If you just wandered onto this channel by some strange twist of fate, you don't know me. I'm a motor officer instructor. I've been that for 20 years. I'm the first guy who started teaching the police motor officer techniques to you, the average rider. And of course, I'm the maker of the #1 selling motorcycle instructional video in the world, the Ride Like a Pro video. Today, we're going to talk about laying the bike down. Everybody knows somebody, and you might even be that person who says, I had to lay her down. Well, we're going to go for a little ride. I'm going to talk to you about this and tell you why you should never lay the bike down and why it happens to some people. Are you ready? Come on, let's go for a ride. Alright, so here's what made me think of this video, because I've done something similar before, but it's probably been over a year. But anyway, I was at a bike night over in St. Pete at big bike night. I don't know, like they get 1,500 people over there. Quaker Steak and Lube, if you maybe have one in your neighborhood. But anyway, I'm over there and this guy recognizes me and he's hobbling over to me. He's on a crutch and he's got one of those big giant casts, you know, those big black padded things they put on people now instead of the plaster cast. And he hobbles over and he says, you know, how you doing? And I've seen the guy over the years, not a friend or anything, but an acquaintance. And I said, you know, what happened to your leg? He said, oh, the car pulled out in front of me and, you know, I had to lay her down. So right away, I'm expecting a great story. I said, what do you mean you had to lay her down? He said, well, I'm coming towards this intersection. This car pulls out in front of me with no notice at all. And, you know, I laid it down. And I said, and then what happened? He said, well, I slid into the car. And when the bike hit the car, it stood up and smashed my leg against the door and broke it. So now, this is such a stupid statement that I got to bust the guy's balls a little bit. So I says, you mean to tell me, even with all that padding on that leg, you still broke it? He goes, well, no, I didn't have the padding on there before the crash. It was after the crash. Okay. All right, now I understand. So you broke your leg because the car pulled out in front of you. And, you know, I've heard this for years. People say this kind of stuff. Whenever they have a crash, they say, I had to lay her down. What does that really mean? What it really means is the rider doesn't want to admit they had no clue how to stop their motorcycle quickly. So what they did was jam on the rear brake, because they used to drive in a car. In the car, you got the foot brake. They jammed on the rear brake, locked up the tire. The bike slid down, low-sided, and usually hits whatever it is you're staring at, which is usually the car that pulled out in front of you. So the question is, how do we make sure that never happens to you? Well, first of all, you got to know that an intersection is the most likely place for a crash. And that's because you got so many things going on. You've got a car that might turn left in front of you. You've got a car that could pull out from the right in front of you. All these vehicles could violate your right of way. Now, if you think about this and you plan ahead, especially if you're approaching an intersection, you've got the green light, these cars are waiting to pull out, you have no idea if they see you, and most of the time they're not looking for motorcyclists. They may see you, but it doesn't register consciously. So it's not like they're trying to cut you off or pull out in front of you. It's just that they actually don't realize you're there. So the car pulls out in front of you. First thing to do is, as you're approaching an intersection, like we're doing here, you want to look as far ahead as possible. Whenever you're riding, you should try to look at least 12 seconds ahead of your path of travel. If you do that, you'll be able to recognize what could be a problem and have a plan. You'll have 12 seconds to make that plan. If instead you're looking 50 to 100 feet in front of your motorcycle, as so many people do, you will not have time to make a plan. So you're looking far ahead, you recognize a potential threat. There's a vehicle that's might turn left in front of you. There's another one that might pull out from the right. Slow down. That's the first thing you need to do. Then cover both brakes. That means keep your finger poised over the front brake, your foot poised over the rear brake, and slow down. That's really a simple thing. If you just slow down a bit, it makes things so much easier, and you'll be able to react a lot easier if your speed is, say, 25 miles an hour versus 35 or 40 miles an hour. So now, as you're approaching and you see these potential threats, you're looking for an escape path. You're saying to yourself, what's the worst that could possibly happen, and plan on, if that worst happens, what are you going to do? Of course, if you can come to a complete stop using both front and rear brakes, all the better. If by the time you get to the intersection you're still going 20 or 30 miles an hour, you may only have time to swerve. If you've never practiced swerving, this ain't the time to practice. You got one shot at it here. Practice your leaning, turning, and swerving in a parking lot or on a deserted road. Practice your braking. If you don't have ABS on your motorcycle, you better be practicing at least once a week, stopping quickly from various speeds. Start at 10 miles an hour, then 20 miles per hour, and on up to whatever speed you may be riding at. If you've never practiced stopping quickly from 60, 70, or 80 miles an hour, well, the time that car pulls out in front of you, that's not the time to practice it. You got to do it under controlled conditions, and you got to do it on a regular basis, not just once or twice a year, but I'd say just about every time you get on that motorcycle, practice a few quick stops. Practice your swerving. If you're at countersteering speeds, if you need to swerve to the left, you push forward on the left grip, the bike leans left and goes left. If you're going to have to swerve to the right, you got to push forward on the right grip, the bike will lean right and go right. And remember that you can't perform maximum braking when the bike is leaning over. So even if you have ABS, you want to first straighten up the motorcycle, do your braking, release the brakes, and then make your swerve. Now on a lot of new bikes, including my new 2020 Harley-Davidson Electric Glide, they have what's called cornering ABS. If the bike is leaning over, you could jam down on those brakes and still come to a stop. Now just before the stop, you better straighten up the bike or gravity is going to take over and pull you to the ground. But keep in mind that the computer is judging how much traction you have, so if the bike is in a full lean and you jam on those brakes, it's not going to give you maximum braking. It can't do it. It's physics. It just simply cannot happen. It will give you braking that the computer thinks that's enough braking. The bike is not going to tip over, it's not going to lock the wheels up, but it's going to be a longer stopping distance than if you first straightened up the motorcycle and applied both brakes. If you're used to driving a car instead of a motorcycle, well, get over jamming on that rear brake. Even if you have link brakes, if you jam on the rear brake, it's going to give you some front brake, but not full braking force. So remember, 80 to 90% of your braking force on a motorcycle is in that front brake. That's because when you hit the front brake, the motorcycle dips down and that tire is pushing against the road surface, creating much more friction. There'll be less friction in the back because the back lifts up a bit. And older Harley Davidsons with those skinny rear tires, that was a major problem, trying to stop that rear tire from locking up. If it does lock, keep it locked. If you happen to lock your front tire, you better release that brake and reapply it. If you don't release it, you're going to go down really fast. Now I'm going to go to our usual training parking lot, and I'm going to show you some tips and some things that you could practice so that you never have to layer down. Layer down means you failed. You don't know what the hell you're doing, so you slammed on the brakes and fell on your ass. Crashing to avoid a crash is a very bad plan. I mean, that's just common sense. So I'm going to go down to the parking lot next, and I'm going to show you what to practice, how to practice it, to keep that from ever happening to you, so you will never have to say, I had to layer down. Okay, so here we are at my favorite training place, because it's a quarter mile from my house and it's an industrial park, and it's always deserted after 5 o'clock or on weekends. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to practice cruising along, braking hard, releasing the brake, and then making a swerve. Downshift, make you swerve around that imaginary vehicle. We'll do that again. Brake, both brakes, hard, release, make you swerve. Sometimes all you'll have time to do is brake and then stop. But if you brake hard and then the vehicle suddenly stops, you're going to have to swerve around that vehicle. That's why the swerve is so important. Got to practice swerving, braking hard, downshift, release, make the swerve around the imaginary vehicle. Now in our Ride Like a Pro video and surviving the mean streets, we show you this exercise in the real world. You set up on a regular street, real world situations, with a car pulling out from the right side, another pulling out from the left. And you could see, we did that I think with 3 cameras as well, so you could see it from every direction. At Surviving the Mean Streets and the Ride Like a Pro video. Remember, you can get both of them on USB for $34.95. That's on the website. Makes a great Christmas present. Brake hard, downshift, release the brakes, and then make your swerve. You want to avoid braking and swerving at the same time. And that was from about 50 miles an hour, just a straight stop. Swerve. It's actually fun to practice, but you don't want to do it out on a regular street for obvious reasons. We show you several exercises in the Ride Like a Pro video that duplicate these real world situations. And I've heard people say, why do you got to ride around cones? I ride in the real world. Well, the cones represent obstacles, and if you can't avoid some plastic cones in a parking lot, what do you think you're going to do on the road when somebody pulls out in front of you? You're probably going to lay her down. You're going to slam on that rear brake, look at the very thing you don't want to hit, and slide right into it. Release, swerve. Brake hard, both brakes. Release, swerve. You could even do this, get that bike swinging and swaying. The very first exercise we do in the Ride Like a Pro video is the slow cone weave, where you got to get that bike swinging and swaying between the cones. And the reason we do that exercise is because in the real world, if you got to make a low speed swerve, that slow cone weave duplicates it exactly. Swinging and swaying. You should be able to get your floorboards to scrape. If you're swinging and swaying enough, getting to know that sound and that it's not going to cause any horrible thing to happen to you. Of course, you want to avoid it on the street, but it's good to know your bike's lean limits. So right now we're at right about 15 miles per hour. We're just barely under the handlebar steering. Above 15, countersteering comes in, but below 15 on a big cruiser, you're turning the handlebars in the direction that you want to go. Now I realize that some people say you're always countersteering, and that's fine. You might be a physicist, I'm not, but I could tell you to differentiate those two things, handlebar steering versus countersteering. We're going to get up now to speed. I'm going to push forward on the left grip. Bike leans left and goes left. That's definitely countersteering, no question about it. But at these low speeds, you'll notice the handlebars got to turn in the the direction I want to go. I look where I want to go, and the bike goes there. Practice that swinging and swaying. You could do it whatever speed you like. If you wanted to set up cones, you can do it. In fact, I recommend 6 or 7 cones in a straight line 30 feet apart and swing and sway through them at 20 miles an hour. That's counter steering. Put the cones at 14 or 15 feet apart and swing and sway through at 10 miles an hour, and your handlebar steering. Know what that motorcycle is going to feel like when you brake hard from speed. Don't wait till the emergency arises, and make sure you look far ahead. And it's always a good idea to cover those brakes. By covering the brake, I'm saving 1 to 1.5 seconds in stopping distance. That's because to go from here to the brake and begin braking takes the average person about a second to a second and a half. If your hand is already there when you think a car might pull out in front of you, and you're going 40 miles an hour, this is going to save you at least a second, and that's 60 feet. So I hope you take my advice and never brag about laying that bike down. If that does happen to you, don't tell anybody, because if they're in the know, you're going to seem like a fool to them. They'll be laughing behind your back. Brake hard. There's a big dip right here, so I'm going to release the brakes and go right around that dip. That's a swerve without the brakes being on. Alright, till next time, don't forget, if you like these tips, we come out with 2 or 3 a week. Please hit the subscribe and click the little bell so every time I come out with a video, you'll be notified. Till next time, keep the shiny side up and ride safe.